Okay, I've got 6 o'clock. I'm going to go ahead and start the webinar and people should start coming in. I see people are starting to come in. We're just going to give it a few minutes and make sure that everybody gets in and can hear everything okay. We got about 12 people out there at our meeting today. Thanks for joining us tonight. All right, we still got people joining, so I'm just going to give it a few more minutes. Again, thanks everybody for joining us tonight. And I'm just, we still got people that are joining in, so I want to just make sure that they get the opportunity to hear everything. All right. And it looks like we got about 16 people. Again, thanks for joining us tonight. And just give it one more minute. I understand it was on the news tonight, so that might have generated some more interest, hopefully. All right. Well, good evening, and thanks for joining us tonight for the Bureau of Land Management draft Campbell Tract Recreation Area Management Plan public meeting. My name is Leslie Ellis Waters, and I'm the Communications Director for BLM Alaska, and I'll be facilitating tonight's meeting. BLM staff are here to give you a brief history of the federal management of Campbell Tract and provide you an overview of the draft Recreation Area Management Plan. But before we get started, I just want to go over some essentials. It's important for everybody to know that we are recording this meeting for future use and possibly posting it online for those who can't join us this evening. You can find the project online by going to the BLM NEPA register, and we will be providing links throughout the presentation. For those of you on the line, you can go to the NEPA register at eplanning.blm.gov and search for the Campbell Tract Recreation Area Management Plan. We will open the meeting to questions after the presentation. However, you can type a question in the Q&A box at any time, and we will answer live after the presentation. Or you can raise your hand after the presentation and you will be called upon to ask your question. To use the Q&A box, it should be at the bottom of your screen. There should be a Q&A box. Just click on that and type in your questions, and then we will answer those after the presentation. For those that would like to talk and ask their question, just click on the hand icon, the raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen. And once you raise your hand, we will call upon you in the order that people raise their hand, and then you'll be allowed to unmute and ask your question. We do have a phone-in caller, so if our phone-in caller would like to ask a question, just do *9 to raise your hand, and then once we give you the ability to unmute, do *6 to mute and unmute. Again, thank you for being involved in your public land management. And now I'd like to introduce Tom Sparks, the acting Anchorage Field Office Manager, who will introduce his team here tonight. Tom.
Thank you so much, Leslie. I really want to welcome the public in. It's a real pleasure to be here meeting with you, and I can't wait until we can do these type of meetings in person. Just a little bit background myself. I've been with BLM since 2003. When I joined BLM, I worked for the Fairbanks office, and in 2005, there was a boundary change between the Anchorage and Fairbanks district, and Nome became part of the Anchorage office. And so I'm here today to introduce the Campbell Tract Plan, Recreation Management Plan, as Leslie stated. Would like to let everyone know that there's 7 different proposal actions, and we're going to be going over those in some detail. And again, it's available on our website as well. And I'd like to introduce the staff that'll be at the meeting tonight. There's Scott Justum. He's our outdoor recreation planner for the Anchorage Field Office. There he is. Scott Stolf, he's another outdoor recreation planner for the Anchorage Field Office. And we have Georgina Behringer. She is our planning and environmental coordinator, and she works for the Anchorage District Office. And lastly, we have Scott Clagett. He is our public affairs specialist, and he works for the Anchorage District Office. The Campbell Tract facility hosts both the district office and the field office for BLM. So with that quick introduction, I'd like to turn it over to Scott Justham, who will have a slideshow for us, and then we can entertain the questions that you may have. And again, I really appreciate everyone joining us tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. And yeah, thanks everyone for coming. I hope this is informative. Some of the stuff we're going to go through quickly, hopefully to be able to provide more time for questions and answers. I will try to go into the proposals as much detail as possible, but then give you folks a lot of time to ask questions. So next slide. So here, what is NEPA? NEPA is the National Environmental Policy Act, and the reason is for the review and inclusion of the public in this process about your public land. So this is our NEPA process. We're kind of in the middle of it, hoping to near the end of the process soon. We're currently in the public meeting and comment time period. And this is really, I'm going to emphasize this, this is really your time to comment on what you think about this plan and the proposed actions you're going to hear about tonight, and you can read about in the documents online. After that, we're going to take your comments. We're going to work on the draft, turn it into a final, and then hopefully we're going to publish that a final plan, and then we'll be able to implement that. Next slide. So this is just, it's kind of the same thing, but I really wanted to emphasize the Far North Bicentennial Park user group here in this timeline. I'm going to talk specifically about this group a lot tonight. So this is just a group of people that has been going on for 30 years. Its purpose is really to share information and concerns about what's going on in Campbell Tract and Far North Bicentennial Park. So that group has been in existence for a long time. So some of the ideas were kind of already been batted around for a while. We had scoping meetings in the last May. We got a lot of those ideas, and we came out with this draft, and again, the final and then implementation. Next slide. So back to this group, and this is kind of key, but you may ask, who is this group? Who do they represent? Some of them are user group interest, like the Alaska Sled Dog Racing Association has been around for a long time. The Arctic Orienteering Club is another group. Single track advocates, there's equestrian users, running groups, Nordic Ski Association of Anchorage. I think you kind of get the point. There's also a lot of local neighbors. There's current assembly members on our email list, and really anyone's welcome to come that enjoys the Far North Bicentennial Park Campbell Tract area. This group was formed in the 80s during the planning process of those 80s planning documents, and there was a signed agreement with the MOA at the time with BLM in 1987 called the Cooperative Management Agreement, kind of setting out a framework to try to cooperatively manage this area. As far as the MOA partnership and relationship, many times we have a lot of shared resources. The MOA has been able to tap into literally millions of dollars of federal grant funding through highway transportation dollars because of the access to federal public land. So our neighbors and our partnerships are really helping each other out. And we'll talk about more about those projects later. And really, it's about kind of the consistent messaging across the greater landscape of this chunk of land. Institutional knowledge, I want to talk about a little bit more about later. But I believe that understanding the past is important so we can learn from those experiences and how to move forward better. Next slide. So as I said, we had public scoping last May. You may have heard of this thing called summer that happens in Alaska, and everyone scatters everywhere. So we got a little delayed. We did have 2 virtual meetings. From those meetings, we received 17 written comments. And from those comments, we really use those to draft the plan. Since drafting the plan, we've had another one of those Far North Bicentennial Park user group meetings, and I'll mention that in a second. And then we do have a summary scoping report available now online that went live on Monday. Next slide. So here we are at the draft. During that January user group meeting, I presented our 7 conceptual proposals at that meeting, almost like a little teaser to that group. Right now we're doing the 2 virtual meetings. Concurrently, we have the online open house, which has all our documents online. We have a 30-day public comment window open right now, and those comments are open until April 20th. From then, again, we'll review the comments, draft the final, publish, and then implement. Next. Okay, so that's our process. That's what we do. But who am I? Like Tom said, my name is Scott Justum. I've had the great opportunity to be able to work for the BLM and the U.S. Forest Service for the last 21 years. I got into this line of work because I love public land and I love that the public gets to use it. My parents' backyard is still a cornfield where I grew up in Ohio, so I really appreciate public land, and I really think it's like really one of the best things that we have in this country. So my job I take very seriously, and it's to help manage and make recommendations that really works for the broader recreating public, the land and the natural resources that we're supposed to manage. Of those resources, we have 24 million acres in Western Alaska. And I just mentioned this because we're talking about Campbell Tract today, but we're far flung across the state and sometimes spread thin. Next slide. But we're here to talk about Campbell Tract, not Western Alaska. So most people think of the trails, the creek, and many times Campbell Creek Science Center. And Campbell Creek Science Center is a part of Campbell Tract. It's part of the Anchorage District Office, whereas I work for the Anchorage Field Office. And those are, again, separate offices. So the Anchorage Field Office that I work for manages the Campbell Tract land and the 24 million acres I mentioned, whereas the Campbell Creek Science Center has a little bit of a broader audience, we'll say, that where they support all of BLM Alaska. So they are all over the state. AFO is Campbell Tract and those other chunks of land. So real quick, kind of going around the map, left-hand side of the map is Elmore Road. We have Smoke Jumper Trailhead. Working south off of Elmore Road, there's Abbott Loop Community Park. If you went south on, or I guess east on Abbott Road, you'd be going over to Service High School and then shoot straight up to Campbell Airstrip Trailhead off of Campbell Airstrip Road. Then we have the Science Center, the Airstrip, and then our main administrative office back towards Elmore Road. So just kind of a quick lay of the land. You know, we really are Anchorage's backyard. There's neighborhoods on pretty much 3 sides, almost 4 sides of them. And we have a high concentration of use in a small chunk of 730 acres. Next slide. So our modern history goes back basically to the World War II and in 1942, the War Department started using 7,000 acres of federal land, which has now become Far North Bicentennial Park and Camel Tract. The cool thing I think about this is many of the roads and trails we use are those old airstrip taxiways, and that's hence the name of the P-38 Lightning Trail, because the planes used to roll along that trail. Next slide. So BLM started using a Campbell Tract for a fire base in the late 50s, early 60s. They started building administrative buildings. And in 1971, BLM took control of 5,000 acres. Of that 5,000 acres in 1982, roughly 4,300 were given to the state and then the Muni to create Far North Bicentennial Park. Also in that year, it's very important, in 1982, Campbell Tract, the remaining 730 acres became our administrative withdrawal. So basically that's for the airstrip and all the administrative use of that area and landscape. But it's not just about BLM. There's tons of federal agencies that use this area. So while we're presenting this, there's tons of federal agencies that use that. Oh, and in 1985, Campbell Tract also became a special recreation management area. Next slide. So here's our 7 proposed actions. These are also listed in order as you'll find them in the environmental assessment or the recreation area management plan. And we'll be going through each one of these specifically. Next slide. So we're here to talk about recreation and really like the types of use, but more so how are we going to best manage those recreational uses in the future? We all know there's a lot of winter recreation, and next slide. There's a lot of summer recreation too. But the thing is like many things have changed since our last planning effort. Next slide. And I think it was Ben Franklin that said something about the only thing that's certain are death, taxes, and change. And changes is what we're currently seeing, and we'll always see them. So really, it's the different types of use and also the amount of use that we're seeing. Some of the big ones you hear about tonight is e-bikes and fat tire bikes did not exist during the last planning effort. And also, not only in Anchorage, but nationwide, everyone's experiencing this increasing growth of use of recreational resources on public lands, even prior to COVID. And then COVID really kicked us into high gear after that. Next slide. So of those changes, you're seeing use skyrocket over the years. We've had roughly a 10-fold increase in roughly 20 years, but the Anchorage population has pretty much stayed the same. You're seeing packed parking lots get even more packed, flowing out over the street. So these are just some of the changes we're seeing. Next slide. And social media has really changed the way that users share and receive information, sometimes both good and bad. They can be sharing trail conditions, sometimes sharing nice photos of their bike, and unfortunately, sometimes car break-ins. And unfortunately, that's a part of Anchorage recreation. Next slide. But the one thing that has not changed and we hope will never change is the way we lean on partnerships and volunteers to help manage Campbell Tract and the greater Far North Bicentennial Park. I'm going to continue to refer to that user group and the 30-year working relationship with the municipality of Anchorage. It works better that way. We're trying to create seamless recreation opportunities. Our rules may not always match, but the coordination is key as far as having that positive experience out on the land. Next slide. Okay, so now we're going to get into the 7 proposed actions. This is the first one. This map is also available online. All the maps you'll also see tonight were made to be geo-referenced PDF maps, meaning you can pull them onto a smartphone and go out in the field and you're the little blue dot on the map. So the idea is to be user-friendly for the people. So this is our proposed new year-round single track, and single track means narrow. It does not mean a steep single directional fast downhill trail. This proposal was born out of a few different comments, both during scoping and in writing. We even received a map on part of this. So the proposal has multiple components to it. The idea was to provide an alternative to the Viewpoint Trail and the P38 Trail. And this can help during busy permitted events or just general busy times of the day or the week. So hopefully the idea is that it spreads out some of the use and the potential for conflicts. Personally, I'm not a fast biker, and I've had to pull over many times on the Viewpoint Trail, while climbing, while fast skate skiers coming up behind me. So, but the idea again is to just separate the use. Another option could be it could be a winter loop opportunity for the winter single track trail known as Stranger and Rambone. So that could be just a fun loop to do. There was also a public comment that there was a desire for a lower graded alternative hill climb to an area known as Antenna Hill. It's those kind of two steep hills near on the Viewpoint Trail. So I was curious about this proposal in particular. So I picked the busiest day we have out there. It's June 15th, and we have a permitted Frosty Bottom fat bike race. And then we have an ASDRA sled dog race on the P38 trail. So my idea is that I wanted to wander through the woods in snowshoes, and I wanted to have as many people as possible on both sides of me to see what that would be like. It was actually pretty nice, and it was better than probably running into a lot of different competitors. And again, just the idea that this could be an alternative to avoid some of that congestion. I had a fun experience. You could see people sometimes and hear people sometimes, but no more than you can on other trails around Campbell Tract. And that was kind of the measure I looked at. Next slide. So this one might kind of seem funny, but we want to identify what we do, and we want to maintain our roads and trails around Campbell Tract. So this is specifically talking about routine or repeat actions that occur around Campbell Tract that could be ground disturbing, being trail maintenance, trail brushing, sign replacement, even the roads that we drive in on, pavement resealing, snow plowing, so forth. And this is all identified in, I believe, Appendix H of our document on basically how we're going to maintain and do things around Campbell Tract. Next slide. So these are just two maps that kind of show the different roads and trails that we are proposing to do that maintenance on. One kind of identifies the Science Center zone and the airstrip and kind of the administrative area, and the other one focuses more on the trails. And we have both of those maps to view full screen later. Next slide. So this is a big one. This, I guess, one of those changes. This is probably the sole policy change that has driven many recreation plans like this all over the country. And I'll explain why in a second. So an e-bike is basically a bike with a battery and a motor. There's lots of different classes of e-bikes, and those seem to be changing and evolving all the time. There's aftermarket parts that people are putting on them. There's governors that are being taken off. So just like any technology, it's going to change, and we're not going to be able to keep up with it, really. But what are the big changes for BLM? So in 2014, BLM and the Forest Service said, e-bikes are motorized vehicles, period. And that was the policy for a while. Well, that changed in summer of 2019 with a secretarial order that basically wanted to open up e-bikes to all trails that normal bikes had been allowed to use. Well, that sent, especially the Park Service into a little bit of a confusion, and with other agencies as well. So each agency had to figure out what to do. So BLM got their final policy at the end of 2020. And basically, to sum this all up, that said that local land managers need to decide whether or not to allow e-bikes and what kind of e-bikes. So they really left it down to the local level of whether or not to allow it. So this is one of the big reasons why we needed to basically make a decision on whether or not to allow them. Other areas you go to around the country, like popular biking areas such as Moab and Sedona, they've kind of made a full-on blanket no to pedal assist e-bikes. So just depends on the area. Next slide. So this is probably going to be another good conversation piece. The winter only single track trails or fat biking trails or whatever you want to call them. This is just another one of those changes that we've been seeing on Campbell Tract, since they've become more popular. So we've seen a huge amount of growth over the last couple of years, and it seems to be increasing every winter. And I guess the hope of this whole concept is that this can start a broader conversation on what we're going to do with these types of trails really around Anchorage. Because I'm just talking about 730 acres and we don't have a ton of mileage on this. And I want to, so here's one thing that I thought about the other day. In the 80s, when dog mushing was trying to figure out what trails to use, and the Nordic skiers were trying to figure out what trails to use, you know, I've heard a lot of, and I'm mentioning institutional knowledge again, because I love hearing these stories from the 60s and 70s and 80s on how these groups had to work together to figure out basically where do they fit in on the landscape. And this is kind of how I see this issue. Is this isn't the end of this conversation. I see this kind of as the beginning of the conversation, and try to figure out how we can incorporate, authorize, manage these trails. And we have ideas that are written into the document. So please read the document, let us know your thoughts, and ask questions at the end. Yeah, next slide. So we did struggle with the name as far as what to call this, and we settled on the winter only single track trails, because from the last side, the cool guy with the sunglasses, you know, you don't want to leave him out, or the skiers. You know, dog walkers too love those trails. So there's a lot of different people that are really enjoying those trails now. And so what we're proposing really is a management framework on how to look at this seasonal activity. And we've been watching this the last couple of years. We've been in conversations with the Muni and the user groups meetings. I remember in 2018 and 19 talking about this issue with the user group meetings, and it's, you know, time to talk about it a little bit more, I guess is what I'm saying. These trails also go off and on of MOA and BLM land. So again, the need for a broader conversation. Next slide. So some of the comments we were hearing about these trails is that they're going to become summer trails. And, you know, maybe some have. And I'm only talking for BLM. So when I heard that, I'm like, hey, I used to take photos of off-highway vehicle hill climbs in the California desert. I'm going to start snapping pictures of these. So we started taking pictures. We GPSed all the trails. And so we're kind of looking basically for those summer impacts. And so far, we're not seeing them. And this is really dependent on the user group. BLM is not going to make a federal rule that you have to stay on this trail in the snow. So really for this to work, it's not a rules thing. It's a, how can we work together to have this recreational activity across a broader landscape. I've also, you know, heard comments like construction or building of trails. You know, people walking with snowshoes through the woods and then riding their bikes, I don't see as construction. If we had to classify it in travel management, we'd call it over snow cross-country travel. And the idea is that this is a seasonal activity similar to some of the dog mushing activity. Next slide. So this is our hazard tree map. You may have noticed that there's some trees dying around Anchorage related to the spruce bark beetle. We're seeing this more and more. It's impossible to drive in and out on BLM Road to our office without noticing just more and more trees dying and then actually falling. Last summer, we started actually having trees fall on our the backside of our government facility. So the proposal is that we want to look at the roads and trails identified here because those are more accessible than any trails to the south. So we wanted to look at those trails, and we're looking at what type of equipment can get in those trails because of the width of the trails. Some of it might have to be handwork, some of it might be mechanized work. So we're looking at 100-foot buffer of the roads, trails, buildings, and parking areas. And we're looking at dead and dying trees that have an obvious lean towards that feature, be it a road, trail, whatever. If they're leaning away from that feature, they will remain for wildlife trees. So timing, when this project first got proposed a few years ago, my first concern was, well, winter would be the best time to avoid a lot of resource damage and vegetation damage and tracked vehicles going over the snow. but then you don't really want to hammer the trails and really displace a lot of users. So we tried to come up with an idea of the timing of maybe, after it freezes, but before the snow gets really good, we might have a really good window when the ground's frozen in November, December, possibly January timeframe. Again, depending on if all of this is condition dependent, and there's a very stringent criteria written into the document on what we will do and when we will do it. But again, the idea is to do it to not displace users and also to minimize resource damage to the ground. Next slide. So this is the existing Campbell Tract fuel break. If any of you have taken the Viewpoint Trail, like south from the Campbell Tract, or I'm sorry, Campbell Creek Science Center, you kind of walk into this nice open birch forest. That's an old fuel break. And then also south along the Speedway Trail, that's another one of those existing fuel breaks. So part of the proposal is just to continue to maintain those projects that have historically happened. And the idea is to remove the more combustible conifer trees, and the deciduous trees would remain. Next slide. So this is a little shot of the proposed project area for the Campbell Airstrip Trailhead. This has come up quite a bit. It came up in the old 88 plan in public comments. We found some draft documents from the 90s. The MOA talked about expanding the parking lot in their Math Trail Master Plan in 2011. And we also heard about it during scoping. So it's been talked about for a long time. So we actually submitted, we submitted a funding request to the Great American Outdoor Act. And I mention this because the land boundary. So the land boundary is actually shared. The entrance and exit roads. Next slide, Scott. Thanks. The entrance and exit roads are both on the Muni land, whereas the parking is all on BLM land. And I mention this because this is important. We had to dig back to 1975 to find that we did have a legal right-of-way from the Army. It limits us on what we can do. So basically, it's the entrance and exit road would remain, and the idea is basically to expand and pave that parking lot. We're looking for roughly 100 spaces, motion-sensitive lights, security camera, probably emergency gates. Again, this is all conceptual. We have not received funding yet, and if we do receive funding, we will need further planning with full-blown engineering drawings. So this isn't the end of this. Next slide. So permits. There's been some questions on if we're going to limit use at Campbell Tract. You can get into Campbell Tract so many different ways. Our intention is never to limit general casual use. The one thing that we do have as a management tool is allowing commercial permits, what type and when they happen. This proposal isn't specifically putting caps or numbers on these types of events or activities. It's more to give future managers a framework and a criteria of what to think about when they're authorizing or not authorizing commercial use on Campbell Tract. Like we would never want to authorize a large other activity while the tour of Anchorage was going on, or the ceremonial start was going on, or that type of thing. For the same reason, we don't want to have like multiple school groups all competing at the same parking lot at the same time. And really, the idea is to not displace the casual user. Really, that's about if that. Next slide, Scott. I think that's all I have. Hopefully I gave you the 30,000 foot level on some of this stuff. We're happy to get into questions. I hope this is really positive, and we can answer your questions and take good input. So that's about all I have. Next slide, and then I think it's over to Gina, Scott. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, if everyone can hear me okay, Scott, go ahead to the next slide, please. All right, so I just wanted to cover with all our participants today how you can submit comment on this draft EA, as well as what the best type of comment is for the BLM to receive. In other words, what's most useful for us. And so the first point that I want to bring up is that votes aren't really usable. So rather than tell us, I like this proposal, I don't like this proposal, please make sure to include your rationale, your logic, the reason why you do or you don't like one of the particular proposals that's being presented in our plan. So again, give us that why. Another useful comment for us to receive, something that we would call a substantive comment that the BLM can act on, is if you are to question maybe the accuracy of information that's presented or the analysis that's done in the document. We welcome new information that might not be included in the document, or anything you want to point out as an error or possibly misinformation in the analysis that was done. Next slide, please. So there's three different methods for the public to provide comment to the BLM. The first, I'll show you in just a minute. I'm going to share my screen so that you can see what the NEPA project website looks like and how to submit comment there. The second opportunity to submit comment is to send an email at blm_ak_ct_ramp@blm.gov. And the third way for you to provide us comment is to mail your comment in to our postal address, which is provided on the screen. I want to inform everyone who joined us tonight that this whole presentation that we just went through with you is also available on the project website. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to take control over from Scott. Thanks for all your help. And I'm going to go ahead and share what our project website looks like and sort of walk you through where to find the document to comment on. So this is the BLM National NEPA Register. And it looks like this if you were to go out to our sort of main page. If you're directed here, you can search by the state. You could search by Anchorage Field Office if you chose, or you could just uncheck this box and type Campbell Tract or ramp into this search and come up with it. All the public information we have provided so far contains a link directly to this site, so you'll be directed here. This is our landing page, or the home page, that describes the dates associated with the milestones we've had. Also, if you are to click on the documents page, this is the page in the left-hand column once you click on documents where you can go. If you scroll down till you find the document, which is the environmental analysis we're accepting comment on, and this green participate now button. What it might look like to some of you is you might land on the page like this, scroll down, and after scrolling down, you may not see that participate now document in the right column without also scrolling over to the right-hand side. It's going to be different if you're on a laptop versus a mobile device, but that's how you can navigate to the environmental analysis that's available there. And if I expand this section right here to show you all the files that are available to you, you can find the EA document as well as the public meeting presentation that Scott offered tonight and the frequently asked questions. I'm going to scroll back up. And if you look back in the chat for this meeting, you'll see that I dropped this website as well as the direct link to the maps page, which I'll navigate to now in this left-hand screen here. And you can see there are 14 maps available. If you scroll down on this page, all 14 maps are listed here. And those map numbers are the ones that are referred to in the environmental analysis document. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen. And if it's beneficial to the people here tonight to go through the actual environmental analysis document and kind of get a tour of the chapters and what's contained in those, I'm happy to do that as well. But I'll stop there and I'll let Scott go back to sharing the presentation and give it back over to Scott Justin if he has anything else to add. And I am gonna just check real quick. I think our MC, Leslie, was having some computer troubles. And so we're just trying to find out right now. We were gonna move into Q&A guidance. And I'm just checking to see if Leslie's still having computer issues. So just bear with us for a moment, please. Okay, I think we're going to pass the baton over to our public affairs specialist, Scott Clagett, to move into the Q&A section. For the rest of the meeting now, we can open it up to Q&A, and I'll let Scott take it over and set some ground rules there for that. Thanks, Scott.
I think I might be back. Do you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Okay, I apologize for that. I am having computer issues, so I wasn't able to see the Q&A or anything, but I'm back. So I guess we'll go ahead and start with our first question from Zachary Huff. Does the draft include proposed recommendations on the primary actionable measures? For example, winter-only trails or e-bikes? Who would like to tackle that one?
I guess maybe Zachary, if you want to go live and ask a question, I guess I'm not fully understanding the question. It seems like you might have a few.
All right, Zachary, if that is okay, I'm going to allow you to talk. And you just need to unmute your microphone. And it should show up at the bottom of your screen. There's a little microphone icon on the left. You should be able to toggle that on and off. All right, Scott, we can probably get to that one later. It seems like you might not have.
There's some written ones that I might be able to speak to. I think he's asking about some he's happy to hear a pragmatic approach to winter trails. Sort of coordination going with owner managers. I'm assuming you're talking about the muni. As far as e-bikes, we're trying to mirror the e-bikes rules for both the MOA land and the BLM land. That's one of the reasons why we kind of decided to authorize it, and also with the public's request to do that during scoping. The winter trails, we are in discussion with the muni about that. Part of the plan is actually written into, it talks about how we know this use will continue to occur. But we want to start that conversation at a greater length with the muni. The muni is also looking to redo their trail plans. So I think their desire is to address this emergent need, or I'm sorry, emergent use, and the need to come up with some sort of like general framework or understanding. And I think that's most of his questions.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions in the Q&A. If there was anybody that would like to ask a question live, go ahead and raise your hand. And for those of you on the phone, if you want to, it's *6. And I see Jeff and Jody Olson, you have a question. So I'm going to allow you to unmute your microphone.
Hi, can you hear us?
Yes, we can hear you.
We were just wondering, so on the winter only trails, so it looked like from your map that you were showing a proposed new trail that you all would be responsible for putting in, is the way we were understanding it. How do, I guess one thing we just don't understand in general is, are there rules around like how trails can be formed? Because we like that we use the winter trails. We use them for biking mostly. We also ski, but we love the trails, and we were just curious how it works, because and I think we saw it on the news tonight too. Somebody commented that, you know, so you go and then suddenly there's a new trail, and we love that. Is that going to continue to be allowed, or how does that work?
Yeah, thanks for your question. And this is one of those things we're trying to figure out. And right now there's no rule to take a pair of skis or snowshoes or bikes, you know, cross country. And, you know, but then hundreds of people do it. We have a trail. BLM has no rules against this use right now. Somebody mentioned the Muni as far as trail construction. And that's where I think terminology is really key on specifically about these trails. Another thing we've talked about is trying to route the trails to specific areas, and there's a couple different reasons for this. If we route the summer, turning into summer trails was one of the concerns. And I'll use a trail on the north side of that map right now, on the north right. That's Scary Tree Trail it's referred to. It goes through a marsh. And again, it's not even on BLM's land, but there's one called Stranger that does kind of go through a marshy, swampy area. If we use those physical features as management controls in the layout and design of these trails, it will never become a summer trail. So those are some of the ideas that we're coming up with and want to talk about more. I also want to comment on this map is that left-hand line is not a winter only trail. That's the blue dot trail, which is a year-round trail. It also is a little problematic how many times it crisscrosses the Sled Dog trails, which is in another map. So I don't have a perfect answer. It is allowed as far as BLM rules go, but you know, it depends on, you know, what you consider a trail. And I think this topic needs, you know, future discussion.
Okay. Can I ask one follow-up question?
Sure.
I guess it sounds like that user group is really engaged in your process, and that does include the sled dogs. This may not be a question for you all. We just noticed that all the changes associated with around the Tour of Anchorage Trail, there was a bunch of signs up. It looked like there was some sort of transfer of land or to the sled dog area. And there was a bunch of signs that said, you can't get off the trail. That's probably outside of your area. You probably don't deal with that. Do you know where I'm talking about? Was there some sort of transfer of permitted rights, or we were unclear about what was different about that area where suddenly a bunch of signs went up, seemed to be associated with the sled dog group, and if they were trying to change something about the access that the bikes were using.
Yeah, and you are correct that that's not on BLM land. It has been discussed at our user group meetings many times, and they've shown maps of that area. And from my understanding, there was a land transfer, and the Alaska Sled Dog Racing Association is looking to move to that area. And I think, you know, one of those concerns is how the trail system will go in and out of that area, and then how other users will, you know, also be using that area. Again, I think it goes back to a broader look of how can we all fit into this landscape, and how can we do it, you know, safely too.
Okay, we got a couple other questions, and got a comment from Mark Grober. Just wanted to note how much I appreciate how well you put this together. Thanks, Mark, for the compliment. And we have another question from Zachary Huff. Would the year-round trail be a single track or constructed as multi-use like Coyote or P38? And then we'll get back to Jeff and Jody, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and thanks for the comments, Mark. It was nice talking to you on the phone. And Zachary, as far as single track meaning a narrow trail, and it would be a multi-use. We're not intending it to be as wide as like really any of the other trails. The idea is to kind of have a narrower trail.
Okay, then we have Jeff and Jody Olson again. You should
Oh,
be
I
able to
thought
unmute.
I
Okay.
thought I put my hand down. I'm sorry. I had asked my question.
Okay, no problem. Looks like we have Larry who has a question. Larry, I'm going to go ahead and open up your mic.
Okay, I am unmuted now, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah, I just wondered, as far as e-bikes, I've extensively used, I don't have an e-bike. I have a fat bike and cross-country skis, and I walk. I've extensively used Campbell Tract. This winter, I've probably done about 400 miles. I've kept track on fitness app on my fat bike, and I've seen all kinds of different stuff. But I really haven't seen very many e-bikes, but I did see one that kind of caught my eye. I've seen about maybe 4 or 5 e-bikes over the course of the winter on the trails on Viewpoint mainly. But I did see one that was a trike that kind of caught me by surprise. And I was wondering if what's next, a 4-wheel e-bike or something. But I just wondered if you were going to be restricting what types of e-bikes would be used.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Larry. We're looking at, I guess, more of the different classes of e-bikes. That is a really good question that we should probably write into the final. I guess I would be concerned with some like ADA accessibility issues if somebody needs a 3 or 4 wheel e-bike. I guess we've even had a conversation with like my coworkers, knows someone that has a full throttle one. And I guess we're not shooting for perfection. Campbell Tract was designated a non-motorized area. And we think that the pedal assist still meets the need of the e-bike users and desires, but still kind of fits into the management framework of Campbell Tract being a non-motorized area. I will specifically mention that 1-wheeled skateboards are not allowed and have never been allowed because they're fully motorized, because we've been seeing more and more of those. As far as the growth of e-bikes, my coworker and I had a day last year when we were working on trail work on the Viewpoint Trail. I think we saw 6 in 30 minutes. So that was a big spike for us. And they're coming in all shapes and sizes now. A lot of times you can't even recognize that it is an e-bike because the batteries are getting smaller, the technologies are getting smaller, and they're hiding them in those the down tubes and the lower crankcase to where, unless you know what you're looking for, a lot of times you may not even notice it's an e-bike. I hope that answers your question, Larry.
Larry, please feel free to raise your hand if you have a follow-up. I would like to mention for Zachary's question on the single track use, that question is addressed in the environmental assessment under section 2.2.1. So, and I don't see any hands raised. Feel free, if you would like to ask a question, go ahead and raise your hand. And for our phone-in callers, *9 to raise your hand. Or feel free to put it in the Q&A box.
And one thing, if people think of things later, my contact info is on there, my email and my phone number is there. I'm happy to talk with anyone. I've even thought it would be fun to go out and take a walk with folks if they're interested. If people have concern, we really do want to listen. The staff that made this plan have many, many decades of experience. And we're passionate about recreating, but we're also passionate about the public process. And so this is really your time to ask direct questions, email us, call us. Yeah, right there. So please, spread the word. We're having another meeting. We have a 30-day comment period. We need to hear from you folks, because this plan isn't going to work unless, the public users get on board with it. So thanks, everybody.
Yeah, and feel free, if you don't feel like putting in your input tonight or putting in a Q&A, you can always do it online. We have until April 21st to receive your input. Also online, you'll be able to see other people's comments, more time to review the maps, the presentations, and frequently asked questions. Okay, we got two. Let's go with David Evans. Your mic should be live.
Hi, thank you. I've been orienteering in Far North Bicentennial Park in the Campbell Tract since 2000, and I've noticed that a number of new trails have been not constructed, but just ridden into existence over the 22 years. And I know that the Orienteering Club is a member of your user group, and I actually was its representative for a while. And so I know you've probably heard this perspective, but we value trailless areas. At the same time, and I'm not speaking for the Orienteering Club at the moment, I'm just talking for myself, but I do enjoy the winter season single track trails as well, but I am concerned that they may leave an impact. And I was glad to see that some of the photographs that you've taken that appear to indicate that there isn't such an impact. And I'm also concerned about them possibly becoming summer trails too. But I guess I'm wondering, does the EA have recommendations for your staff to go out and periodically monitor the locations of winter only trails in the summertime and the springtime to actually verify that there aren't impacts? And I guess I'm curious to know also why you're opposed to instituting a rule that says that the winter only trails don't eventually convert into summer trails. I guess I'm suspecting that it's because you just don't have the ability to control that, because people will just go out and do essentially what they want to do. And it sounds like that there's actually no BLM regulations that prohibit people from riding trails into existence.
Thank you, David. And just a point of clarification, I want to make sure I didn't misspeak. When I said the no rule, I was referring to strictly traveling over snow, not trails turning into summer trails. That would be considered resource damage, and we would not allow unauthorized, summer trails like that. Good question about monitoring, because you have to keep doing monitoring, right? So yeah, ideally, I would like to have a few photos at key points, again, on BLM land, just to monitor the use. You can't say there's going to be zero impact. There's a tiny bit of impact. Sometimes there's like roots scratched. And I hear what you're saying about the Arctic Orienteering Club has made comments, both written during scoping and both in our regular user group meetings. And part of that is the dialogue that I was talking about, that we want to get started and we really need to get started as far as how can we all fit into this landscape. And I mentioned the dog mushers earlier. I've worked in areas before that people have just like Sedona, people used to say, well, I'm going to build trails faster than you can take them out. We don't want to get there, and we don't want that sort of confrontation. What we do want is collaboration, working with the user group, because it's not going to work if we do have these trails going everywhere. And I guess my point is that we have a recreational niche or need and desire from a pretty large group of people, being the bikers, that they're not getting their needs met or their experiences met by going on those wider trails. We talked about conflict too, as far as like running into skiers too. And I think many times that's what these users, and myself included, I've walked my dog on them this year because I unfortunately can't ride a bike. But I still like those trails because of where they go, and they have a more intimate feel. As far as the trail list areas, we did identify those in the document as far as a trailed zone and a non-trailed zone. And we did talk about the concerns that have been raised by both yourself and the Orienteering Club. We have a limited amount of space and a lot of people using it. So we're trying to find that balance.
All right, Scott, we've got a comment in the Q&A box from Richard Sapersky. I would suggest trail maps at all intersections so new users can figure out where they are. Also a big star indicating you are here. And then we have Larry who has his hand up, and then I'll go to Brian's question that's in the Q&A box. Larry, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yes, this is Larry. Just regarding parking, I've certainly seen the parking lot totally full there at the entrance to Campbell Tract. I was wondering, in the old days, the back parking lot at the Science Center, the gate to the Science Center Road was opened, and is that ever going to be opened again for the public to use at certain times of on the weekends or whatever? And another thing I started doing when I saw the parking lot full, I'd just go over to back on Abbott to the ball fields. They have a quite large parking lot there, and I'd just access Campbell Tract from there. And I've even started using the ski area to access the trails, the hilltop ski area. But I was wondering about that back parking lot at the Science Center. Will that ever be open again to the public?
As I mentioned earlier, I don't work for the Science Center, and they have a separate role and responsibility, and that's also considered the Science Center's administrative site. So to the best of my knowledge, it's not going to be open on weekends or evenings. It's been closed since COVID, since most have been working from home. So I guess in answer to your question, it's probably most likely not going to be made available for the public's use because it's administrative purpose. And you made a great point about going over to Abbott Loop. I can't remember if it was when COVID first hit or the first full winter of COVID. We were putting signs up to direct people over to we call it the Mosquito Playground parking lot. And that also was in cooperation and conjunction with our partners with the Muni. We're not going to, send people to go park in the Muni's parking lot without asking. So. And then one comment about the signs, there has been a few signs come up missing recently. There were signs at all intersections, and usually there's a hole drilled where you are here. Part of the document, the ramp document, does talk about a full-blown sign revamp, entrance kiosk revamp, updating the maps to include, the new trails that are not currently on our maps, like the hillside trails. So we do want to upgrade some of our signs and facilities also.
So we did have a question in the Q&A block from Brian Kirchner, and it says, will all comments through this process be publicly accessible? If so, where would one find them? For example, on the BLM NEPA register site or the CT ramp? Do the comments undergo any review before being shared publicly? And the answer is the comments received on this draft EA will be reviewed and coded to determine the issues that are raised, and the final EA will contain a section that addresses how the issues were addressed, as well as the changes made from draft to final. All right, and we have another question from Mark Grober. I think some of the questions, comments underscore the value of sharing those 17 scoping comments in addition to your summary. So I wanted to ask for that again.
So it sounds like people want to see the full scoping comments from everyone. I'd have to defer to my colleague Gina and our manager Tom. Usually they don't do those with EIs. Those are more EIS level things, but I'm gonna have to defer to somebody else about that.
Gina, can you hop on and give us a quick answer?
Yeah, I'm trying to understand the context of the question. So there is a scoping summary report that is provided on that NEPA register site that I went through earlier. And that scoping summary report lists sort of the issues that came up during scoping, and underneath each issue that was raised, we've indicated where in the draft environmental analysis document that issue is discussed. Does that help? I'm trying to find the original question again. I hope it answers the question. So if you'd like to see how the rest of the public did comment during scoping, which was back in May and June of 21, you can go refer to that scoping report. There's also a section of the environmental analysis document that contains similar information, the scoping summary there. Tom, would you add anything to that?
I think that's about it. If I understand the question correctly. So, thank you, Gina.
I think it's what you've said, Gina, is that the summary report identifies all the issues that were identified in scoping, but it does not verbatim give the scoping comments. Is that correct?
That is correct. And that's generally our process, is we will take comments received. We go through the comments and we analyze them to determine what issues are being raised. And then in the document that we are creating at this time as the draft, in the future it'll be the final, we will provide how the BLM responded to or discussed those issues in the document stage that we're at. So right now we're at the draft stage, so it's a scoping summary. And the comments that we do receive on the environmental analysis, the draft right now, when it comes time to publish the final, there will be a section that will detail essentially how the BLM responds to the issues raised through the comments submitted during this process.
Okay, so Mark is wanting to know if he could submit I'm assuming a Freedom of Information Act request. And I would say, Mark, that is your prerogative, that you are more than welcome to submit a Freedom of Information Act request. And we have a website specifically for that. And I'll try and get that in the chat for you.
I was going to say, absolutely, sir.
And I got Jeff and Judy Olson. Can you tell us who the Heritage Land Bank is that borders Campbell Tract on the north? Is that the Anchorage Muni?
Yeah, it is Muni land, but yeah, the Heritage Land Bank, I guess, does have somewhat of a separate function, but to the best of my knowledge, it is still considered Muni land. The one thing we didn't talk about tonight was the like Smoke Jumper Trailhead and the 68th Road Realignment Project. It's been delayed for 4 years now. And we have been working with that group as far as an easement and an the neighborhood access trail, if you're asking about anything like that. Hope that answers your question.
Okay. And Jeff and Jody say thank you. So I think that answers the question. Do we have any more questions on the environmental assessment that we can answer? I can say that for those of you that had questions about the winter only single track, that proposal is section 2.2.4 in the environmental assessment. And section 3.5 of the Recreation Area Management Plan document addresses maps. So I don't see any hands raised. Again, if you're on the phone, if you would like to ask a question, it's *9. And Mark, I see your question in the Q&A, and I think that they are not refusing to make the scoping comments public. It is not our normal practice to make scoping comments public for an environmental assessment. And we are making all the issues available in the summary report. But if you would like to get copies of those scoping comments, you are free to submit a Freedom of Information Act request, and we will process that accordingly. Okay, I'm not seeing any hand raised.
This is Tom. I was wondering if it would help any folks that are on board if Gina would take the time to review maybe some of the document itself, or would we rather wrap things up and people can explore that on their own? Just wondering. Over.
All right, David, I got you.
Yeah, thank you. I had another question. So Campbell Tract is currently an area where dogs are supposed to be on leash all the time, everywhere. Correct me if I'm wrong. And I'm wondering if the EA talks about dog leash requirements in the Campbell Tract at all.
Yeah, thanks, David. It does identify, there's different parts of both the EA and the ramp that talk about current existing rules and regulations. My great colleagues are going to have to help me where there's a section called Visitor Health and Safety, I believe. And it talks about kind of a lot of those issues like trailhead crime, dogs off leash. So it does talk about them. And I guess the best answer I could say is it still is a current rule that dogs are required to be on a leash at Campbell Tract. I will say I'm not a cop and I'm not out on the ground a ton. If we see people with problem dogs, we do say something to them. So that rule isn't changing, I guess is the best way to say it.
Could I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
So a lot of people have dogs off leash on the winter single track trails. And I don't want to self-incriminate, but I might. And I guess it seems to me like that's a fairly victimless crime, and you ought to consider allowing that use. It's impossible to winter bike those single track trails with a dog on leash.
This is Tom. I think I'd like to just chime in briefly. Originally that rule was in place to match the municipality of Anchorage, and their regulations have changed to, voice command and so forth. And so it's something that, BLM would certainly consider. And we have had active discussions among staff level. So we're still looking at that. We've heard both sides of the story, if you will, about, our enforcement capabilities, and also, how we're kind of in conflict with the municipality right now concerning the dogs. It's kind of a broader issue, but that is something we could certainly look at. This plan doesn't address that specifically. In other words, the restrictions are in place currently, but it's something that the BLM could certainly look at in the future. And I really appreciate that comment because it does come up quite a bit. Thank you.
Okay, next I'm going to go to Laura Lancaster. She has her hand raised. Laura, you should be able to unmute your microphone.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to, not to be argumentative, but I'd rebut that it's a victimless crime because dogs off leash don't make a mess where you can find it and pick it up. And there's a ton of not picked up mess all around from unleashed dogs on the single track trails and all around them, as well as all the other trails. I'm just going to say that.
Thank you for your comment, Laura.
Yeah, I real quick, Liz, I appreciate that comment. I just want the public to know, like, we spend a lot of money providing dog waste bags. We just bought $3,500 worth of dog waste bags, and that's what we buy annually. And our budgets are getting smaller. We do our best to provide the public with them. You know, it's a problem all over Anchorage, and it's a problem all over the country, really, with, you know, dog owners that don't pick up their waste. So please pick up your dog waste. Thank you.
Next, we have Jeff and Jody Olson.
Yeah, I guess I with regard to the dog issue, I absolutely see both sides. I have the same concerns around the dog waste, and then I also have concerns around the fact that there's a rule that is being just rampantly not enforced, and so I guess the way I would view it is look at what the problems are associated with dogs off leash. And I think those are the big things, like, are they controlled? Are they troubling other users? And are people not picking up after them? And is there a way to actually patrol for those problems that people are causing, and talk to dog owners that are not behaving responsibly, and actually do some patrolling to enforce those aspects of the bad behavior? And because it's frustrating to see that, and it's also frustrating to, you know, have a rule that just is totally ignored. But at the same time, I you know, when I see a dog that is behaving well, it's like, okay, well, they're fine. And as long as I know that that's a good owner and they're going to pick up. I know you can't do that informally, but if you do some example cases, then maybe you set an example. I don't know.
Well,
It's a
thank you,
hard
Jody.
issue. It's a hard issue to manage, and, you know, not every dog or dog owner is the same. And just to let you folks know, and I mean, there's been dogs attacking horseback riders where a woman was thrown from her horse and had major head injuries. So, you know, it might be a very slim chance, but, you know, unfortunately, those accidents do happen. But it's a challenging issue. It's one it's not a proposed action within the plan.
Yes, and it sounds like it's something that people are very passionate about, and I understand that. But I'd like to focus back on the recreation area management plan, and I see that Frank has a comment about the unleashed dogs, and David Evans has his hand up. And David, I'm going to go ahead and allow you to talk.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I apologize. I was too flippant about saying victimless crime. I absolutely agree with the dog waste problem, and having a dog off leash when you're on a single track, unless you're keeping close tabs on them. Yep, it's real easy to miss. That's why my wife and I bike with the dog between us, so we always have an eye on them. But I understand everyone doesn't do that, and dog waste is a huge problem. mostly around the trailheads, and I do see it on the single tracks as well. But anyway, apologies for making that slip.
No worries. We want to hear from everybody, David. So thank you. I would like to say that it is addressed in section 3-8 or 3.8 in the environmental assessment. And, you know, I ask everybody on this call today, if they see people out there not picking up their dog waste, we do have the bags available and help us out. So with that, David, I see that your hand is still up. Did you have another question?
Nope, I just forgot to lower it. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. And again, if you don't get the chance to ask a question tonight, please feel free to call. The contacts are on the screen there, but I'll go ahead and read them out because we do have one call-in listener. And the field manager is Tom Sparks, who's acting right now, and he can be reached at 907-443-2177. Outdoor recreation planner Scott Justin, he can be reached at 907-371-6654. Or outdoor recreation planner Stolf Short, who can be reached at 907-799-4154. And then we have a question from Frank Lahr. It says, you have a phone number posted on a sign near the Campbell Airstrip parking area regarding loose dogs and dog waste. What happens if someone calls that number?
I think that number goes to our office's front desk. It's the best of my knowledge.
Okay. Let's see if, are there any other questions on the recreation area management plan? I think we've addressed the dog issue. I don't see any hands raised. Again, please feel free to provide your input on our NEPA planning page, or you can contact Tom, Scott, or Stolf. We have until April 21st to hear your input. We'll give it a few more minutes. All right. Well, you're welcome, Jeff and Jody. Thank you for participating and providing input tonight.
Yeah, I'd just like to say thank you to everyone, and particularly how many hours that some of the folks had said they used on Campbell Tract. It's really a jewel for the Anchorage Bowl, and so I really appreciate all the staff efforts as well in this document, and we sure look forward to receiving public comments. And we have another session like this on Thursday in the afternoon, and then the written comments and so forth. So we really appreciate all the comments tonight. It's very much appreciated.
Okay, with that, I'll say good night, everybody. Thank you for attending, and hope to hear from you.